Hey guys, Peter here to do a very different kind of video, a video that I've never done before, but it's that time of the year, everybody's putting their lists together, and I will be doing a top 10 albums of 2022, but today I'm going to be doing a very different kind of video. I'm doing my 5 biggest disappointments of this year. Now, I don't want to call them flops, I want to call them disappointments because I had very high hopes for what these albums could deliver, but yet they didn't. I'm going to go through chronological order of release to make things easy, starting off with Sabaton, The War to End All Wars, out March 4th on Nuclear Blast. This is the band's 10th studio album. They are a power metal band, and this album was a disappointment to me even before I pressed play. The moment they announced that they were going to release another World War I themed album, I was already thinking, what is happening here? Are these going to be songs that didn't make the cut of the previous record that I have laying around, and therefore we can't tour, we can't play, we can't do this, we can't do that, let's just put them all together and release an album? I don't know if that's exactly the truth, but that's the perception that I have, and once I listened to the album, that perception kind of became reality, because this is a very uninspiring album. It's a safe record. It sounds like Sabaton, but it doesn't feel like Sabaton. The hooks are gone, the big choruses are gone. This album doesn't have that memorability that you need in the sound, in the vocals, in the lyrical content. It just feels like a very mid Sabaton album, an album that in future years, when you go see them live, they're not going to have any songs on the set list. I highly doubted that they're going to be able to squeeze this orange and get any juice from it for future set lists. This album just doesn't have the quality, just doesn't have the memorable songs for that kind of purpose, for that kind of take. After this one, we have Fozzy with Boombox, out May 6th on Another Century. This is the band's 8th studio record. They are a hard rock band led by none other than Chris Jericho, Le Champion of AEW. And this is a disappointment for a simple reason. I was a huge fan of Judas. When I look at Judas, I look at the Black Album from Metallica. Those two records had equivalent impact, not necessarily in terms of what they sold, but the impact that they had on the bands. They really put those two bands on the map. So if you think about that, this album should be at least Load, at the very least Reload. It's not, it's Saint Anger. This record is atrocious. The sound is horrible, the vocals too much auto-tuning. It just felt to me an album that was trying to be something, and it never really became that something. And that something was a hit. Considering how successful Judas were, I believe that Chris Jericho went into the studio thinking, we have to create Judas 2.0. How are we going to create a hit record? How are we going to create hit songs? So it didn't allow the process, the creative process, to be organic and for those songs to happen naturally or not happen at all. He'd rather move the creative process into a specific direction, trying to create specific songs. Whenever you do that, you take away everything away from an album. You take the soul away from the music. And this album is soulless. There's nothing there for the listener. It's a record that doesn't deliver on any parameter that you would be hoping that the album would deliver on. Next, we have Amon Amarth with the Great Heathen Army, out August 5th on Metal Blade Records. This is the band's 12th studio album. They are a death metal band. And this album, following Berserker, feels like a complete disappointment. If I had to rank these 5 albums, I would rank this as my biggest disappointment of 2022 because this is the album that I had the greatest expectations of. I was really hoping that this album would be even better than Berserker. It's not. It's missing a bunch of stuff. The structure is not there. The design is not great. The songs, from a thematical point of view, feel a little bit all over the place. It's really hard for the listener to engage with the album. It's really hard for the listener to find the red line through it. The songs are also missing impact. The chorus is not as hooky. The choruses are not as bombastic. The songs don't have the same kind of melody. The DNA sound of Amon Amarth is stripped away from this album. It feels more experimental sound-wise, not necessarily vocally, but sound-wise. And those experimentations, in my humble opinion, didn't go well. I don't want Amon Amarth to reinvent the wheel. I don't want them to release a prog album. I want Amon Amarth to release albums that talk about Viking lore and Viking themes, and that's what I want. I want them to stay traditional to their sound, to who they are. This album not only is not traditional to who they are and to their sound, it's not even that well put together, even if you're thinking about it from a more experimental point of view. it just doesn't feel right for me. It's an album that fails to deliver, and I had incredible expectations because, like I said, I was a big fan of Berserker, and I was expecting this one to top Berserker, and it didn't. The only song that I think they can take away from this album, the only song that I think they can squeeze out of this record and keep it on future set lists is The Great Heathen Army, because that song has the right theme, the right approach, the right sound. It matches well with their set list, it matches well with the songs around it. So if there's one song that you can take away from this record from a live performance point of view, it's definitely that one. But outside of that, there's not really memorable songs that are going to become cornerstones of Amon Amarth and their live performances going forward. Next we have Behemoth with Opus Contra Natrum, out September 16th on Nuclear Blast. This is the band's 12th studio album, and they are a black metal band. And they are a black metal band that I'm not quite sure exactly where they're going with their sound. Do they want to be black metal? Do they want to be more avant-garde? Do they want to be extreme metal? Not that the genres matter, but if you define yourself, or if you try to define something, you at least have to give the listener a sense of where you're going with your music. And this album is kind of like 2 steps back before you take a step forward, but you actually never get to take a step forward, so you're technically just walking backwards. That's how this album feels, because it lacks character. From a design point of view, I don't like the design of this album. This album doesn't feel to me like it has a start. Perhaps it has a middle. I'm not even sure if it has an end. It's just a little bit over the place. It needed to be better defined in the overall design, in the overall structure, so that the listener understands exactly what is this album trying to do, where is it trying to take me, and I didn't get that sensation listening to the album. Musically, the album is not that creative either. It feels very mid, it feels safe, it feels like a Behemoth album that tries to be different, but not different to the point that completely breaks away from the path. So it's kind of pregnant. It's a kind of pregnant album, and I don't like these kind of albums because it just doesn't give me anything new. I would rather them go back in time and create a record that's more traditional to their earlier albums, or then create an album that completely breaks away with their sound over the last 10 years and give me something that I wasn't expecting. I feel like that's the best spot for a band that has the longevity of Behemoth to be at. Either you reconnect with what you've done, or you break away and you go do something completely different. To release an album that tries to be different and still stay connected to the past, and then fails to deliver on the things that have become Behemoth, talking about the devil and that kind of stuff just doesn't cut it anymore. You need to be a little bit more creative with even your lyrical content. You need to be a little bit more creative with the message, with what you're trying to portray. And this album just feels like something that had to be made, but they didn't necessarily knew how to make it. Last but not least, Slipknot, The End So Far, out September 30th on Roadrunner Records. This is the band's 7th studio album, and you can call them a heavy metal band, you can call them a new metal band, but there's one thing you cannot call it, is say that this album is one of the best of 2022. This album doesn't deliver. I mean, I feel like Slipknot are slipping, and they're slipping with every record, and they've been slipping for a very long time. This doesn't take anything away from their live performances because they're still outstanding, but I think as far as the creative juices of putting full-length albums together, I feel like those juices are abandoning them. And maybe they'll go down the path that I have seen, that it's been reported, of just releasing singles. Maybe that's where it's at for them. Maybe that's where they need to be. I don't think they need to release albums in order to tour, in order to headline festivals. They have the name behind them that's always going to give them those opportunities as long as they have new material out there. But that new material doesn't have to be a full-length album. This record doesn't feel like it moves the needle for Slipknot. It's not an album that you say, wow, this is Slipknot reinventing themselves so many years later, or this is Slipknot going back to their traditional sound, or this is Slipknot creating an album that I wasn't expecting, but I'm blown away by it because the sound is great, the delivery is great, the lyrical content is great, the overall feel of the record is great. Once I press play, I can't get out of it. No, once you press play, you can't wait for the damn album to be finished. So this record is not what I wanted from Slipknot. I don't think it is what anybody wanted from Slipknot, regardless of how big or not you are as a fan. It just feels once again like a very safe record that has mid-quality songs, mid-tier songs. The problem it has, all of it being mid-tier. It doesn't have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 in the context of 10 songs. No, every song on this album is a B track. It doesn't cut it as far as the expectations that fans would have from a Slipknot full-length album. And on that note, this is it. These are my 5 biggest disappointments of 2022. Now I want you to let me know what your 5 biggest disappointments are. Use the comment section on this video, share those albums, share the names of those bands with us. Let's all trade notes and let's see where we all are as far as the albums that didn't meet that bar that we set for them even before we ever press play. I'll see you all at the next video.